Eric Doty is the content lead at Doc, a software platform that's changing the way that businesses and sales leaders collaborate with their customers and prospects. In this episode, Eric, who is also known as a bit of a one-man content band, shares everything that you need to know about running a content operation when you are just a team of one. We talk about the best way to find, source, and collaborate with freelancers, as well as the importance of content as a brand impression. Now, Eric invests heavily on SEO content, but as a B2B brand, it can't just be any run-of-the-mill content. In this episode, Eric talks about the importance of making sure that it is as authoritative and credible as possible in order to make a strong first impression, especially when you're selling to executives and senior decision makers. We also talk about his experiences running and starting a podcast, how to put the opinions of your company and subject matter experts forward, and much, much more. Enjoy! Awesome, man. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me. I was obviously having a little stalk of your LinkedIn. Obviously, we've been following each other for a little while, but one thing I noticed, a common path into marketing leadership is specialization first, right? From content lead to VP of marketing, for example. But it looks like that you took the opposite path. Could you tell me a little bit about your journey as a marketing manager and, most importantly, what got you into content marketing specifically?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's more of a meandering path than the opposite path, maybe let's say. So I started in marketing as I came in through SEO. So I was an SEO specialist. Then I was managing a team of SEO specialists. Then I was managing a team of SEO and PPC specialists. And so I sort of just was going that like SEM route or whatever you want to call it. And then within that same, I was working for an agency doing that. And then I moved over into the corporate marketing side. So like marketing for our agency. And there I was just a generalist sort of marketing specialist doing content events, like, dragging the conference booth around, doing webinars, just sort of jack of all trades type stuff. And so that lent well into, for my next job, I went to a company called Global Me that was based out of Vancouver. That was there. I was the sort of first and only marketer. And that title was marketing manager. Really, it was mostly a content role though, because it was like inbound content marketing, mostly SEO. There was support for things like events. As the company grew, it also turned into more like sales enablement, where we had a very sales heavy process. And I learned quickly, like inbound only gets you so far. Then you need to shift all your sort of marketing content support to helping your salespeople sell, which was a kind of a new lesson for me because at the agency, the product sort of sold itself. But and then from there, I learned, okay, I'm doing all this sort of wide scope of things. But what I really like is the creation part. I don't love lugging the conference booth around and trying to like do the sales part myself. So I really just gravitated towards the content stuff. And because of my background in SEO, I was also doing freelance blogging for SaaS companies. And I learned that sort of my strengths were the creation part. And then I also just liked it more. So then from there, I joined a company called Butter which was a like seed stage startup as the content lead. And was like kind of narrowly focused on content creation. And then Doc has been similar to that, mostly content. Although in both of those roles, as the only like true in-house marketer, you end up doing everything too. So it's like the titles change, but I've sort of always been marketing generalist with a content focus. And it just so happens that, it's sort of more about finding like marketer company fit than, let's say, I didn't necessarily change the scope that much of my role.
Yeah. I feel like for about half of the marketers I talk to, lugging around event collateral and being the event monkey is a bit of a rite of passage for all of us getting into marketing, right? It sounds like you've had a heavy focus on content creation and content writing, and I believe that you write a lot of the content at Doc yourself. The art of writing, what is it about it that you kind of feel an attraction to, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think part of it, which is a trap for marketers, is that you go this end-to-end process of creating, and then at the end you've produced something, right? Where you had this outline, you go through this whole creative process, and at the end you have a blog, you hit publish, it's on the website, it's very nice looking, has a nice graphic, and you're like, done, package this thing up, I've done my job, which of course is not the job. Like the job is for that thing to then do work to produce revenue for your company. So I think there's naturally this very seductive thing about creating, in that every time you create something, it feels like job well done and you can pat yourself in the back for it. So I think definitely more so early in my career, especially when you aren't as attached to revenue numbers, maybe when you're more junior, or you're just in this bigger company architecture where you're more distant from revenue. I think it's a very seductive feeling. Once you're the only marketer in a company, the lines are moving up or down because of your actions, and you get way less attached to the creative process itself. Like, especially at Doc, I have minimum content production numbers for myself because I know that I'm way too attached to making something perfect. So if I don't set production goals of we have to get at least this much out per month, I will just toil in the details that don't actually matter.
Yeah, 100%. You can give yourself a pat on the back, but when you're reporting to the CEO, he or she will not be doing the same thing unless you hit those numbers, right?
Yeah. And I should add too, like I got into marketing just because I ran a personal sports blog and just loved it. And it just was fun to do. And I was like, wow, you can have a job where you make stuff and you just write and people will read it and be influenced by it. Like what a fun thing. So that's kind of how I got more into content, I guess, and why I find the creation process alluring.
That's how I got my start as well into SEO. Actually, I followed this kind of free, it might have been on YouTube, course about, hey, here's how to create content and get it ranking. And this was like 2008, so the content sucked because the quality bar wasn't that high. It was all around like Korg MIDI controllers because I was into music production, and you have to find a niche. So I really niched, but it did generate some search traffic. Did you find your sports blog did the same thing?
Yeah. I knew nothing about SEO when I ran that. It was 13 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And I had a popular Twitter account. So I was generating all my traffic through the tweets. Like I logged in the other day and I ranked for the weirdest terms on the blog. Like I just checked into it. It was like Ottawa Senators autographs, because that was the hockey team. And we wrote someone for the blog just wrote a dumb article like ranking the quality of each autograph. Like this one looks really nice, this one looks like crap, you can't tell who wrote it. And for some reason to this day that's still number one ranking article 10 years later, because I guess talking about niche, I'm not sure I have much competition for that one. Yeah.
That's fair enough. Well, it's good to hear it's still performing, even if it's a little bit dormant. It seems like you've become known as the one-man content brand in the content marketing world. What's your philosophy behind running a well-oiled content operation, especially when you are the only person kind of leading it?
The way all of our jobs are is you have objectives and you have constraints, and the game is figuring out how to achieve the objectives with it. It's like you're playing a board game. Here are the rules, and we're all playing by it. When you're a one-person team, you just feel those constraints really heavily, and it shifts your perspective on marketing. Right? When there's 5 of you, you can have slow weeks, or you can have up and down periods, and overall the average of 5 marketers will stay more or less the same. When you're one person, one project slows me down and suddenly you just feel a ripple effect through everything. And at first that was really stressful, but then after a while I shifted my mindset, and it was kind of freeing because you only have so many resources. You have to set reasonable expectations. They have to be, once you understand your constraints, you can set really reasonable goals and not compare yourself to like HubSpot, who can produce 1,000 articles a month or whatever, right? And you learn what it feels like to be one person, how much you can actually produce. So now that I've been doing that for about 3 years, I have a very good sense of personal capacity. But then your task as a marketer becomes very different. It's how do you scale yourself as much as possible? Because if you're just doing your personal best, doing like, how many blogs can I write in a week? Okay, one blog a week plus running our social media plus whatever. Moving the needle would take 5 years. And when you work at a startup, you don't have time. We have to grow at a certain velocity to make shareholders happy or to get, attract future investors. The line just has to be exponential. And when you're tasked with growing traffic, which is basically my main KPI, as a one person team, you have to just be super ambitious with how do I scale myself. So since I've been at Doc, that's when I've really leaned heavily into tools, automation, process. Because if you toil in creator world, like I was talking about before, where you're finessing every sentence, you just won't achieve the velocity that you need to grow. And so my philosophy has really been like, understand my constraints. So what are my time constraints? What are our business objectives? And for us, we're shooting for 5 years from now. We want to have, hundreds of thousands of website visitors. So how do you get from, as one person, how do you get there? So we have to plan projects that are aware of the constraints, or like you have to take a certain number of big bets while also bringing in sort of freelance help to help with everything. So basically every task, just to finish that thought, is like, what do I have time for? If I don't have time for it, can I automate it? If I can't automate it, can I bring in more people power, either through contractors or agencies or, friends who can just do like assistant type task, virtual assistant type tasks. So yeah, you always just have to be optimizing for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. On your note of comparing yourself against HubSpot, I feel like it's the equivalent of following models on Instagram. If you want to make yourself feel really shitty about your output, great thing to do. Before we get into automation and your approach to hiring freelancers, you said a second ago that part of figuring out these constraints is to find time for some of these big projects. And obviously you have, from what I can see, a pretty well-oiled editorial content machine. What are some of the bigger projects, some of those kind of, standout, maybe campaigns, for lack of a better word, are you kind of working on at the moment?
Yeah. So goal one for me was, like you said, get that editorial process up and running. And I'd say it maybe took between 3 and 6 months to get that sort of well-oiled machine going so that it felt more like autopilot, or more of maybe autopilot's the wrong word because it sounds very effortless, but it felt more like, okay, I know this is going to take me 1 to 2 weeks a month max. And now I have another 2 weeks to fill with other things. We launched a podcast, which I hadn't done before. When you haven't done something, it's just going to be slow. Doing the whole branding and the concept for the show and recruiting guests and figuring out the entire production workflow for the podcast, as you know, it's a big job. That was a little bit surprising to me how much time that took. So spinning that up, and we're doing a weekly show, which is a lot of, like, an hour every week. So that's a lot of content to deal with. So that was a big project. And then now we're trying to focus on some bigger SEO bet projects. So one thing we're working on that we haven't launched yet is like a revenue enablement library. So Doc, the main value proposition of Doc is that we have, like, it's a collaboration tool that you can, sales or onboarding teams can use to share content with buyers or customers during the sales or onboarding process. So normally you're sending lots of emails with proposal attachments, you're sending checklists in a spreadsheet, you end up with this really long email thread that gets forwarded to all these stakeholders. The buying process is really complicated, or the onboarding process is really complicated. Doc just brings that into sort of a landing page style, nice UI that everything is nicely organized. And so part of that is people are always looking for examples of content that they should include in their Doc workspaces. So as sort of an SEO side project, almost like a programmatic thing, we're working on building a library inventory of example assets. So here's sales proposals, slide decks, white papers, ROI calculators, just all those tools, all the content tools that people are using, or sales enablement content that people use during the sales process and sort of aggregating examples. That's kind of a fun SEO project. Of it might get backlinks. You might be able to rank for each of those sort of asset terms. There's just, it's sort of a one-time cost of going out and finding all these things, but then the content kind of makes itself. And so you have to, the general philosophy is to build time for these, maybe one per quarter, for these SEO projects that, they might fail and they might do nothing, but then they have more potential than a blog of sort of generating that ROI. You can email gate them or something. We haven't figured out the whole architecture, but that's an example of sort of a bigger bet SEO project.
Yeah. Adding some utility that's very related to the product behind your search efforts. We recently did a webinar with Dale from Geckoboard. And when he stepped into the head of marketing role there, he looked at what was working and he noticed there was a handful of template pages that were actually driving a lot of user sign-ups. So he went all in on those, creating, template pages, maybe like an Excel version for people who can download it, but also start using this in Geckoboard. And he found that, I can't remember what the number was, but it increased user signups pretty significantly. So I think as a product-led company, it's going to work pretty well for you guys.
Yeah, we did the template project too. I completely forgot about that. That was the first thing that I did. And it worked to decent success. Part of the challenge is that we're a startup and we actually changed the product a lot, that a lot of the initial templates we built now aren't to the product's full capability now. So it would be a huge project to go back and change all the templates. So in some ways we abandoned that a little bit. But that's the challenge of being at a seed stage. The last company I was at, Butter 2, which was kind of a Zoom competitor with lots of built-in tools to make meetings more engaging. We also did a big template library play there. And that was a really effective SEO strategy of just all this long tail of different templates people are looking for.
Yeah, amazing. They work gangbusters. A second ago, you said that when you're figuring out what to prioritize, can you automate it? Can you give it to freelancer agency? Can you find a mate for the VA stuff? On the note about freelancers, I've noticed that freelance writers seem to love working with you. What do you think it is about you and working with Doc that writers and maybe any freelance talent appreciates?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I was a freelancer myself for a while. I still occasionally, but not as much now. But so I understand the pain points of being a freelancer. So there's the obvious thing like paying on time and getting someone a brief on time and those sort of administrative things. But from a pure content perspective, my biggest challenge was, how do I tie this back to the product? You've given me a keyword normally, and that's it. Maybe 2 or 3 sentences on the structure of the post. Maybe now people give a clear scope link or some tool with SEO stuff built in, or maybe an AI generated brief. And as a writer, I found that none of that actually gives me that much additional information beyond just the keyword and Googling. Like the content manager is normally in this production mode of like, pull up a Google Doc, put a keyword in, assign to somebody, and go, your job's done. But I find that if you underinvest in that step, so this is selfishly as a content lead, if I underinvest in the briefing process, then the quality of what comes back to me is just not going to be good enough, right? And so if I overinvest in the briefing step, it helps the quality of the content, but then the writers also like it because they actually understand how to tie the topic back to our product. And then the other thing is we try to give them our own opinions on whatever the topic is. So either I'll pull in some quotes, I'll give them quotes from our CEO, or I'll just connect all the dots for them and say, here's the sections. And in this section, we want to make these 5 arguments because that's really important to our product philosophy. And so there's the briefing process, which is more in depth. This was part of dog fooding our own product too, but I create a doc workspace for each writer. And in there, I share demo videos of the product. I share sort of our content philosophy. I share, when they first start writing with us, a checklist of here's all the steps because we do a test project. So, I'll send you a brief, you will do this, you'll get your invoices set up in this program. All of those uncertainties that they normally might have to manage themselves as the freelancer, I just eliminate that. So part of it is process, part of it is product information. And then I also try to take a bit of a coaching mindset with the feedback, treat the freelance writer more as an employee or someone I'm investing in long term rather than this part-time help or whatever other people might think of freelancers as, because I want the person to be able to write 20 plus articles for Doc. And if you don't invest time in giving the feedback, like the other day I got a really good piece back from someone as their first piece, but I still sent a 15-minute Loom video breaking down, where it could be better or especially the product tie-ins. Because how would you know as an outside writer? How would you know like how the topic of sales proposal like really ties into our product, right? And so I approach it from a lot of angles, and then it also helps. So the benefit for me is the content's better, and then the freelancers enjoy the process more. They stick around longer. The ROI of how much they cost, every article they write gets better. So for me, the cost stays the same, the quality gets better. So versus if you're really churning through writers constantly, then it's like an employee training, right? There's a cost in re-onboarding a new employee, looking for that person, etc.
Yeah, and hiring good writers is such a pain in itself, and it's really, really good to hear that you have that value, right? We like to say, so our editors, much like you, even if it's their first project and they may not have hit it and we're still evaluating them, one of our editors will shoot them a Loom saying, like, here's what you nailed, this is what we need to do instead, and here's why. It's that value of everyone who walks through the proverbial freelance doors must leave better than they walked in, right? And so I'm glad to hear you have that value.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I feel like there just has to be positive value in investing in people and giving them that feedback and not treating, because you could take the opinion of the reason they're freelancers is because we're trying not to invest more of our own time. And as I said before, I'm very protective of my time, but I find that the investment in the beginning saves me so much time with the writer going forward, or how many I'm the person who's going to do the final edits, and normally I have to do some sort of upgrade to like how we talk about our product, no matter how well the writer does. But I'm saving, if I'm writing 10 plus blogs a month and I can save myself an hour every blog by giving the person 15 minutes of feedback, then it's totally worth it.
It all adds up. It all adds up. Amazing to hear, man. On the other piece of working with those constraints, I personally love nerding around or nerding out over automation and no code. And it doesn't seem like you're shy about talking about it yourself. Could you tell us a little bit about the systems that you built at Doc? Is there a process or a Zapier workflow that you are most proud of?
Yeah, I think the end-to-end blog process I'm quite proud of. We also have done some fun stuff with our podcast now too. Like you upload a file into Airtable and then I approve some stuff and then it goes into YouTube automatically. Like we're publishing things to YouTube. But for the blog, I think there's so much administrative back and forth that happens with freelancers. If you think of all the steps, there's doing the initial keyword research, then getting that into a Google Doc, then assigning that Google Doc to somebody, which normally happens messily by sharing the file or sending an email or both sometimes. And there's all the back and forth edits. There's publishing the thing. There's all these very manual steps that if you value yourself as sort of a knowledge worker and my brain is why the company's paying for me. They're not paying me my salary to drag files around in folders. And if you take that perspective and you're like, how am I just going to build something instead and build a process? That's kind of the philosophy I've taken. So I guess in terms of the actual workflow, if anyone, it's kind of a big topic to tackle, but I say for anyone starting, the key is to have like a central resource where everything lives, like a content management system. For me, I use Airtable. You could theoretically do it in Notion or Asana or any project management tool. I personally like Airtable the best because It's very spreadsheet like at its core. And then, if you want a Kanban view and all that stuff, you can manipulate it. But it basically gives me this big central database that then with Zapier, I can connect it to Webflow. I can connect it to social media. I can connect it to our internal Slack channels. I can automate emails. So like the biggest time saver for me in that process without going through 100 steps of this automation workflow is the big one is creating Google Docs. So when I drag a file in from like idea to like ready for brief, it will pull in all the fields from Airtable. It'll make a Google Doc. It'll plunk everything into the Google Doc, and it'll link the doc back to Airtable. And people have asked me before, why don't you just do this all in Notion? Because Notion sort of has content in the tool. But we were talking about this before we joined the call, but I love using the best point solution for each task. So the easiest thing to write in is Google Docs. It's a pain to work in Notion. It's hard to share that with a third party. Google Docs is just the easiest way to write. So I'm gonna
getting the formatting into any CMS from Notion as well.
So
it doesn't work.
So so the big time saver is making Google Docs, and then all the emails that go out to freelancers. Basically, just dragging something in the workflow to the next step will often trigger either internal notifications to our team or emails to freelancers like, this brief is ready for you, or these edits are ready for you. So because I figured they probably have 100 Google Doc notifications coming in their email every day that are really easy to ignore. And so instead I try to automate those emails. So that's probably the biggest time saver for me.
Yeah. It might give freelancers that little dopamine hit as well, just to see Eric's given me another project. Fantastic. I've got work to do, right?
Yeah, when I publish the blog, it says, this blog's been published. Here's the link. You can add it to your portfolio, or please share it. And it's just another little thing that makes us a little bit easier to work with. And maybe they do share the blog, and maybe we get sort of that network effect from it.
Yeah, that's amazing. We definitely use something similar to your Airtable process, but I'm definitely stealing some of your email ideas there. Your editorial content I find quite impressive, especially as search is the primary channel. It doesn't read like SEO content, platitudes, filler, all that jazz that we're probably used to and kind of sick of seeing. Is there a content marketing philosophy that you follow, perhaps specifically on the editorial side, that you wish that more people believed in?
Yeah. So part of the avoiding platitudes is strategic, and not just like the quality bar is strategic, because our ICP, or our ideal customer profile, our sales leaders, customer success leaders, they're normally fairly senior people. And we feel like our content might not drive conversions in the same way, because we don't really have an end user audience as much, maybe even as much as we thought we would when we started our content strategy. They're more decision makery, and they're not going to read a blog and convert necessarily. So we really, while we still want to try for the SEO game, we figure, why not kill two birds with one stone and try to get thought leadership into that content as well. And I mean, thought leadership's kind of a cheesy word, but basically, can we infuse strong opinions? Can we infuse an understanding of their pain points back to this subject, which might feel kind of top of funnel keywordy? Can we still have a strong stance on this? And part of that as well is we're only writing about subjects that are tightly related to our product. There's things we can solve. And so that makes it easier to have strong opinions or product tie-ins. So part of it is just, we have to be smart enough sounding to appeal to our ICP. And that took me a lot of ramp up time, because I'm not a sales expert. I'm not an onboarding expert. So the first, I actually freelanced for Doc for a year before joining, which really helped, because I was just interviewing Alex, our CEO, for every article, and he's very knowledgeable on the subject. And then after I joined, I tried to sort of wean myself off that, depending on the CEO's time to write every blog, because that's not feasible. And so, I try to interview our sales our sales, our AE Andy, and listen to sales calls, et cetera, to like just gain some of that product knowledge, follow lots of people on LinkedIn, et cetera, and then give the freelance writers that input that I've learned as much as I can in every post to try to make it feel sort of relatable for sales leaders. I think another thing is just focusing really on the introduction, because I've done it myself as the writer. Like your introduction is your afterthought because it's not the meat of the post. But I feel like someone has to land on the thing and have the impression of these people understand me. And if we at least achieve that, then we've achieved some brand impression on them, right? And so I'll very much push back on intros that are just there and say, can we actually get a relevant pain point that's maybe one more level detail than you would expect? Or if you're the writer and you're like, okay, what's the pain point that would happen with this topic? Okay, obvious one, throw that one out. What's something more detailed and just annoying? Go with that one. Or just keep hitting pain points in the introduction. For example, so I'll give you an example. So for like sales proposals as a topic, the V1 intro is like, it's very frustrating to create a sales proposal because it's like sales proposals are so hard to make or something like that, right? But no, like what is the actual annoying part? Like, okay, you have to involve a designer and they don't get back to you. You have to fiddle around with some finicky Word document template, or focus on these actual like emotions that are a frustration that someone would have on the topic, and get really particular, because that's what triggers, I find, as the reader, oh, this person gets me, right? So really, really trying to push back's maybe the wrong word, but encourage writers in the intro to really drill down on something real and painful, and a problem that we actually solve, right? And so that it helps to know your product really well to be able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I was chuckling a little bit to myself when you were telling this story, because we're going through refresh project with a client at the moment, and we're training a really good writer, our processes around it. And we looked at the intro, and it's just like the vague kind of benefits or outcomes or frustrations, right? It's like, sales enablement is important for closing more deals. It's like, no shit, that's why I'm here. Like, how? Whether you're speaking to kind of like for lack of a better word, a bottom-up audience, or someone more senior, you've got to speak to those specific and strategic pain points. And like you said, something that's relevant to the product as well. Because even if 80% or 90% of readers glaze over that, if it speaks to the strategic challenges of an entire team, that reader's going to be going, yeah, these guys get me, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think people, if you thought of it more of an impression of like a social media post, if someone reads it and gets that, oh, these let me rephrase that. On social media, I think we're fine with making a positive brand impression on somebody. And for some reason with SEO, we don't treat it as that same opportunity, because we're so focused on conversion. And while you should do that, it doesn't take that much effort for most content to get there, right? Maybe if you're writing a glossary of terms or whatever, like who cares? It just needs to be functional. Or like before we were talking about templates, you're just putting content on the page to rank the template page. But for a blog where the goal is to get someone to read it and sort of be moved by it to do something, I don't see how you can just plunk a bunch of keyword information down and hope that's going to change anything. So
exactly. It's good for content marketers like you and me, though, because the bar is so low on search that just by going to 90, 100%, 110%, you're already way ahead of most of the content out there.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say too is sort of understand your company pillars or opinions, and to have opinions, and then you can resurface those in almost every single piece of content. Like a doc writer only needs to understand sort of, we talk about this concept of buyer enablement, there's the concept of sales enablement, like you discussed. There's only sort of 5 or 6 things we need to talk about every time. And it's how do you relate them back to the topic, and knowing those really well and knowing your opinions really strongly makes it then it doesn't take extra time to infuse. Thinking again about my time constraints, the only way I think it doesn't take extra time to infuse the content with that, right?
100%, 100%. It doesn't take that much effort to become an expert in the product and your stance, and then, inject that originality into your content. Amazing. Eric, I've taken enough of your time. I really appreciate you digging deep. There's one last question before I let you go, which is something I like to ask all guests. What are you working on right now that you are most jazzed about?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about our podcast. It's a new format for me. We talked about SEO and blog so much because that's where my brain lives. Our podcast is called Grow and Tell, and just the really quick pitch is it's stories from revenue leaders, so sales, customer success, and marketing, in how they grew normally startups from sort of zero to some substantial amount of revenue. So it's like the first customer success hire who grew out an entire team at at a successful company. So we've talked to people from Facebook, we've talked to people from Loom, Intercom, and it's really cool to get those sort of early struggles of working at a company. And it's been really fun to make and sort of sit on the sidelines and listen to these interviews, and then also try to figure out the end-to-end podcast workflow, which is a whole other beast that we didn't even get into. But
tell me about it.
So that's something I'm excited about.
Yeah, amazing. Grow and Tell at doc.us. Give it a listen.
You got it.
Eric, thank you very much. Where can people learn more about you?
I'm all over LinkedIn, too much on LinkedIn. So Eric Doty there. I'm also on X as Doty Content, if people want to follow me there too.
Amazing. There'll be links in the show notes. Eric, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Beautiful. Thanks, Tom.